I was 6 years old the first time I had the vision. A sterile room bathed in harsh, bluish light. A nurse's cold hands adjusting a plastic mask over my face. The muffled beeping of machines. I shouldn't have been able to remember it, but I did. Vividly. For years I thought I was just dreaming, that this bizarre scene was some half-imagined fantasy. But then came the second memory. I was lying on my back, unable to move, staring at a mobile spinning above me, yellow stars, and a crescent moon. The sense of helplessness wasn't fictional. It was primal. I could feel it in my bones. My parents were stunned when I described the hospital room down to the color of the IV stand, the layout of the machines, even the face of the pediatrician who had passed away when I was just a few months old. I shouldn't have known those details. I shouldn't have remembered any of it, but I did. What began as a curiosity became a medical obsession. Neurologists, psychologists, even infant memory researchers were baffled. I wasn't remembering toddlerhood. I was recalling moments from the neonatal ICU. Moments that, according to science, should have been locked away forever in the vault of implicit memory. Somehow, that vault had been cracked open, and that's when the question started. Why me? How deep did these memories go? And what if I remembered something I was never meant to see? My name is Daniel Moreau, and I was born 12 weeks premature. I spent the first 64 days of my life in the neonatal intensive care unit at Mount Sinai Hospital in Chicago. At the time, doctors didn't think I'd make it past the first week, but what none of them could have predicted is that I would one day remember everything, every light, every sound, every face. According to mainstream neuroscience, our brains aren't equipped to form long-term episodic memories before the age of 3. While implicit memory, like basic motor functions or emotional conditioning, can start earlier, explicit recall of events is considered virtually impossible in neonates. And yet, by the age of 7, I had begun describing experiences with an uncanny level of accuracy that shook my entire family, and later, the medical community. What followed was a series of evaluations that drew attention from neurologists at top institutions. Functional MRI scans, neuropsychological interviews, and even hypnosis were employed to understand what was happening inside my brain. Was it a fluke, a case of implanted memory? Or was I the first documented person to have unlocked the deepest, most inaccessible layers of memory formation? This is the story of a medical mystery that challenges everything we thought we knew about memory, consciousness, and the human mind. It's not just about what I remember, it's about why I remember and what those memories revealed. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and comment below telling us what country and city you're watching from. My first memory was a whisper, a vague flash that appeared during a quiet moment in the school library. I was 8 years old, flipping through a picture book about space when a sudden image struck me, a rhythmic mechanical sound, like compressed air being released in intervals, followed by a faint, distant heartbeat. I froze. It was more than imagination. It felt lived. That evening I told my mother about it. I described the whooshing sound, the glow of a red light on a monitor, and the sensation of being observed through a glass wall. She laughed nervously at first, assuming I had seen a scene in a movie or a cartoon, but as I kept talking, describing the peach-colored walls, the blue-striped curtain, and the scent of antiseptic, her smile faded. "That's from the NICU," she finally whispered. Her voice trembled. "That's exactly what it looked like when you were born." My mother had taken a photo on the day I was discharged. Me swaddled, wires trailing from my chest, a monitor blinking behind my incubator. She pulled the photo from an old album. The curtain, the monitor, even the arrangement of equipment matched what I'd described. My father looked up, his face pale. Over the following weeks, more fragments surfaced. I began recalling specific sensations, like the sting of a heel prick, the press of a cold stethoscope, and the feel of a rubber-gloved hand on my forehead. At first, these moments came like dreams during sleep, but soon they started invading my waking life. In the middle of class, at the dinner table, even while brushing my teeth, they weren't random thoughts, they were experiences. Concerned, my parents scheduled an appointment with Dr. Elaine Grant, a pediatric neurologist at Northwestern. She listened carefully, her brows tightening with every detail I shared. After 2 sessions, she looked at my parents with a mix of disbelief and awe. "Children can have vivid imaginations," she said carefully, "but Daniel's descriptions are far too consistent with medical reality, things he simply couldn't know." Dr. Grant referred me to a memory specialist at the University of Chicago, Dr. Miguel Arriaga, who worked in neurodevelopmental cognition. He introduced me to terms like episodic memory, encoding, and hippocampal consolidation. Using simple tests, visual cues, and storytelling prompts, he evaluated how my brain processed and retrieved information. Within 2 weeks, he told my parents something astonishing. Daniel appears to have access to deeply encoded memories from a period we believe to be inaccessible. My case was shared at a local neurology conference. Soon after, I was scheduled for an fMRI. The imaging aimed to observe how my brain responded to specific stimuli, especially those from my early life. They played NICU ambient sounds, showed generic images of incubators, nurses, and medical gear. Unlike typical children, whose brains showed mild, generalized activity, my scans lit up in the hippocampus, amygdala, and even the anterior insula, regions linked with emotional memory and perception. "We've never seen anything quite like this," said Dr. Arriaga, holding the scan results. "It's not just that Daniel remembers, it's that his brain treats those memories like they happened last week." My story gained attention among a small circle of cognitive researchers. Some were skeptical, suggesting implanted memory or cryptomnesia. Others were captivated. I was soon dubbed the boy who remembered the impossible. But for me, it wasn't exciting. It was confusing and sometimes terrifying. I couldn't tell when a memory would hit. Sometimes I'd smell rubbing alcohol and be thrown into a full sensory recall of being intubated. I began to lose sleep. I developed anxiety around hospitals and medical shows. My parents tried shielding me, but it was impossible to predict what would trigger the next episode. I wasn't just remembering, I was reliving. Dr. Grant suggested therapy with a specialist in pediatric trauma memory. That's when I met Ms. Keller, a soft-spoken psychologist who didn't question whether my memories were real, only how I could learn to live with them. "Sometimes," she said during our first session, "the brain leaves breadcrumbs so we can find our way back to something it needs us to see." I didn't know it yet, but those breadcrumbs were about to lead me somewhere even deeper, into the mystery of why my mind had held on to all of this, and what secret it might still be keeping. By the time I turned 9, the memories were no longer occasional. They became invasive, intense, and unpredictable. I could be walking through the grocery store, see the color of a nurse's scrubs on a stranger, and suddenly I'd drop to my knees with a jolt of fear and confusion, flooded by a vivid memory of being restrained for a procedure. These weren't flashbacks. They were full-body re-experiences, complete with sounds, smells, and even pain. My parents initially tried to downplay the episodes. But after I collapsed in the school cafeteria, hyperventilating and whispering phrases in broken neonatal vocabulary, light, mask, no breath, they knew something had changed. This wasn't just a curious medical anomaly anymore, it was a neurological condition disrupting my daily life. The school nurse called an ambulance. I was taken to the emergency room, not for physical injury, but for neurological evaluation. At the hospital, a young resident named Dr. Junaid sat with me for nearly 2 hours. He didn't treat me like a child with overactive imagination. He asked for details. I told him about the way the plastic mask smelled faintly of mint and latex. I described the translucent tube that entered my nose and how my chest rose with mechanical rhythm. His face hardened. "That's a CPAP," he said quietly, "for newborns." That night, my case was escalated to a multidisciplinary team. Neurology, psychiatry, pediatric medicine, and cognitive science. Everyone had a theory. Some believed I had a rare type of temporal lobe epilepsy, presenting as vivid memory recall. Others suspected dissociative memory disorder. One psychiatrist floated the idea of perinatal PTSD, trauma absorbed before language, now bubbling to the surface through unprecedented neuroplasticity. The following week, I was admitted for extended observation. My room was designed for comfort, but nothing could hide the fact I was back in a hospital. Ironically, the environment amplified my symptoms. Any small stimulus, an intercom beep, the smell of sterilized linens, the shadow of a nurse passing the doorway, could set off a wave of disorienting recall. It was like being stuck between two timelines, the child I was and the infant I had been. During a monitored episode, I was connected to a full EEG array. The team observed a burst of electrical activity in my temporal lobe as I entered what they later described as a hyper-recollection state. My heart rate increased, my eyes fluttered. I began mumbling about the yellow mobile and the bright light in my eyes. When I came to, I was sobbing. I wasn't sure why, but the fear felt ancient. The scans confirmed abnormal neural firing during these episodes, but nothing consistent with epilepsy. My brain seemed to be creating a unique signature pattern. One researchers called retrieval storms. These weren't hallucinations. My hippocampus and amygdala, areas responsible for memory and emotion, were engaging with an intensity typically seen in trauma survivors reliving battlefield experiences. Except I had no war. My battlefield was a plastic bassinet under fluorescent light. The emotional toll was immense. I stopped sleeping through the night. I began fearing my own memories. I withdrew from friends. I started stuttering. I lost weight. My teachers noticed I'd drift off mid-sentence, eyes glazed, body tense. Some classmates teased me. Others were afraid. I was 9 years old and already known as the weird kid who remembers being a baby. My parents were desperate. They pushed for answers, but the specialists only offered theories. One doctor suggested memory suppression therapy, using low-dose benzodiazepines to block certain types of neural activation. Another proposed deep meditation and guided memory reframing. But Ms. Keller, my therapist, warned them, if he's accessing something that raw, it means his brain needs to process it. Suppressing it might stop the symptoms, but it could damage his long-term development. So the decision was made. I would enter a cognitive rehabilitation program designed for pediatric trauma patients. It was experimental, unproven, and emotionally taxing, but it was the only path forward. I didn't know then that this process would bring even more memories to the surface, including one that would change everything. One memory buried so deeply, so painfully, that unlocking it would force everyone, my doctors, my parents, and even me, to ask the unthinkable, what if this wasn't just about memory? What if it was about truth? The therapy room was warm, softly lit, with beanbags instead of chairs and a pale green rug that smelled faintly of eucalyptus. Ms. Keller sat across from me, her voice slow and even. "Today, I want you to close your eyes and follow the sound," she said, pressing play on a track of ambient hospital noise, a gentle blend of beeping monitors, hushed voices, and rhythmic breathing. "You don't have to force anything, just listen." I let myself sink. At first, I saw the usual, the mobile, the glass wall, the mask, but then something shifted. A cold sensation spread across my chest. I wasn't just watching, I was inside it. A different room, a different light. The temperature was lower. A male voice shouted something I couldn't understand. I heard crying, but it wasn't mine. Then a sudden jolt, a metallic clang, in darkness. I opened my eyes, gasping. My body trembled. Ms. Keller leaned in. "What did you see?" I hesitated because it wasn't just a scene, it was a feeling. Dread. Violation. I didn't have the words for it yet, but I knew something had gone wrong in that room. I couldn't explain it logically. I just knew. "There was another baby," I whispered. "But something bad happened." Ms. Keller paused the session and made careful notes. That night she called my parents. The next morning she requested a meeting with Dr. Grant and Dr. Arriaga. I didn't know it at the time, but my memory had triggered a chain reaction. Something about the way I described the scene, the metallic tray, the shape of the lamp, the angle of the bassinet, aligned with real equipment from the early NICU layout, now archived in hospital blueprints. Dr. Arriaga began cross-referencing hospital records from the year of my birth. Due to a data migration in the early 2000s, many files were fragmented or incomplete, but a retired nurse, Maureen Blake, was still reachable. She agreed to review a set of anonymized notes based on my descriptions. What she said stunned the team. "That sounds like room 6B. That room had a code blue 2 days after Daniel was born. A twin didn't make it." The word twin exploded in my brain like a thunderclap. My parents had never mentioned a sibling. No lost child, no complications beyond the prematurity. But when confronted, my mother went pale. My father sat down without speaking. Tears welled in her eyes. "We weren't sure how to tell you," she whispered. "You had a twin brother. His name was Caleb. He only lived 36 hours. The silence that followed was unbearable. The grief they had buried for years was now mine to carry too. But more than grief, I felt connection, as if I had known all along. That second cry in the memory, it was his. The coldness, the panic, the darkness. It was the moment he died. And somehow some part of me had absorbed it. My memory hadn't just reached into my own past. It had touched his. This discovery shifted everything. Ms. Keller introduced the term intertwined memory encoding. Some researchers believe that twins, especially those in neonatal trauma, can develop overlapping neural patterns. If one twin passes and the other survives, echoes of shared sensory input may persist. It's rare, almost mythical. But in my case, it was now the leading theory, that I wasn't just remembering my life, I was remembering fragments of my brother's death. The implications were massive. Neuroscience journals requested anonymized case studies. Bioethicists began asking questions about identity, grief, and memory boundaries. I was invited to speak via video at a conference on developmental cognition in Boston. I was only 10. I didn't want the attention. I wanted answers. Why had this happened to me? Why had my brain kept this locked inside? And why now, years later, had it decided to open the door? I returned to therapy with a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just a patient. I was a witness. Ms. Keller helped me craft rituals of remembrance for Caleb. Small moments of stillness, drawing exercises, letters I would write to him. I couldn't change the past, but I could give meaning to the memory, and in doing so, something inside me began to shift. Not peace, not yet, but something close. The darkness had a name now, and that made all the difference. After discovering the truth about Caleb, something in me changed. The memories didn't vanish, but they came with less violence. Instead of crashing into me like a wave, they now drifted in like fog. Still disorienting, still painful, but manageable. Ms. Keller called it a narrative anchor, the mind's way of processing trauma through meaning. But there was one lingering problem. The frequency and unpredictability of my memory episodes continued to disrupt my daily life. That's when Dr. Arriaga proposed something radical. He had been in touch with researchers at Stanford working on an experimental neurofeedback protocol designed for pediatric PTSD. The idea was to use real-time fMRI to help patients see their brain activity during memory recall, and then train their minds to regulate it. The technique was still in trial phases, and no one had attempted it on a case like mine, but I was willing. My parents were terrified, but I was tired of being a prisoner to my past. A month later, I was flown to California for a 10-day monitored trial. The Stanford lab was cold and sterile, the machines humming like living things. Electrodes were placed across my scalp. A projection screen was positioned before me inside the scanner. They showed images from my past, some reconstructed with AI, others simulated from my descriptions. Every time a memory triggered a reaction, the screen would glow red. My job was to bring it back to blue. At first, I failed miserably. The moment I saw the incubator set up, my body tensed and the red bar surged. But Dr. Kavita Roy, the lead neurocognitive therapist, coached me through it. It's not about stopping the memory, she explained. It's about observing it without drowning in it, like watching a train pass without climbing aboard. That analogy stayed with me. The next day, I managed to hold a memory for 15 seconds without physiological escalation. By day 5, something extraordinary happened. I was shown a reconstruction of the NICU at night. Low light, distant alarms, a nurse entering through a glass door. I recognized it immediately. It was the night Caleb died. My chest tightened. The monitor blinked red. But I remembered Dr. Roy's words. I focused on my breathing. I didn't fight the memory, I held it, and then the red line dropped. Blue. Stable. For the first time, I didn't just relive the memory, I witnessed it. The session ended in silence. The researchers stared at the data in disbelief. Dr. Roy turned to me and said, "Daniel, you just did what many adults with combat trauma can't. You regulated a pre-linguistic memory embedded in your neural core." I didn't fully understand the science, but I understood what I felt. Clarity. Not peace, not yet, but a moment where the storm paused. The remaining days were a blur of progress. I learned to identify early signs of escalation, tightness in my throat, shallow breaths, certain colors or tones in ambient sound. Through visualized biofeedback, I could now guide my own brain back to equilibrium. When I returned to Chicago, I brought more than data. I brought control. The memories didn't vanish, but they became part of a larger story, one I was learning to tell on my own terms. Back home, my parents saw the change immediately. I was laughing again, sleeping through most nights. I returned to school and gave a presentation on the brain that left my science teachers speechless. Ms. Keller called it integration. I called it survival. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt like I was living forward, not being pulled backward. Still, there were ethical questions surrounding the treatment. Could it be used on others with early trauma? Should it be? Could we trust memory that emerged from such deep, unconscious terrain? Dr. Arriaga presented my anonymized case at the American Academy of Neurology, where it sparked heated debate. Was I a miracle of neuroplasticity, or a dangerous exception that challenged everything we thought we knew about the brain? For me, it didn't matter. I didn't need to be a case study. I needed to be a kid who could walk through a hospital without breaking down. And now I could. The decision to undergo the Stanford protocol was the most important of my life. It didn't erase the memories. It gave them shape. It gave me shape. And most importantly, it gave me the power to choose how they would define me. After Stanford, everything changed, but not in the dramatic way movies might portray. There were no sudden miracles, no cinematic montages of success. Recovery was subtle, quiet. It began with a single morning when I woke up and realized I hadn't had a single memory flash all night. No dreams, no panic, just sleep. That alone felt like a victory. Ms. Keller continued to guide me, but our sessions shifted. We weren't unpacking trauma anymore. We were rebuilding identity. Memory is just one way to understand yourself, she said once, but it's not the only way. She encouraged me to explore new parts of myself. I began journaling, drawing, learning guitar. For the first time, I started building memories forward, deliberately, consciously, joyfully. School became a safe place again. My teachers, once hesitant, now saw a boy curious about the brain, about storytelling, about resilience. I even gave a short talk at a school assembly titled "The Mind Remembers." It was the first time I spoke publicly about Caleb. I showed his baby blanket. I told the audience, I don't remember him with words. I remember him with light, with silence, with the feeling of being held. At home, my parents began opening up too. We created a small memorial shelf for Caleb. Just a framed photo, a candle, and a folded onesie. It wasn't morbid, it was peaceful. I didn't need to imagine him anymore. He was part of us. My mother said she felt lighter. My father, who rarely cried, placed a hand on my shoulder one evening and simply said, "Thank you for remembering him when we couldn't." One of the greatest shifts came during a hospital visit, but this time, not as a patient. I had volunteered to read to premature infants in the same NICU where I had once lain helpless. The beeping machines were still there. The lights, the antiseptic scent, still the same. But I didn't flinch. I walked through the ward, a book in hand, and whispered stories into incubators. I wasn't haunted. I was home. Dr. Grant visited me a week later with a copy of a neuroscience journal. My case had been published, anonymously but with full clinical detail. The title read, Episodic Memory Access in Neonatal Survivors, a Case of Extreme Early Encoding. I asked her what it meant. She smiled and said, It means your brain did something we didn't believe was possible. And now we have to rethink what memory even is. I wasn't interested in being famous or studied, but I was interested in helping. I began speaking, carefully and always with permission, at parent support groups for NICU families. I'd sit with mothers who had lost a twin, with fathers who couldn't make it to the hospital in time. And I'd say the only thing I knew was true. They knew you were there. Even when they couldn't speak, even when they were barely alive, they felt you. That's what memory is. By age 12, I had developed a sense of duality that most kids don't. I knew joy could coexist with pain, that the mind can store love and terror in the same neural pathways. I still had moments of recall, sometimes triggered by music or a certain kind of lighting, but they were no longer terrifying. They were reminders, like echoes of a story I had once lived but now understood. Ms. Keller eventually said I no longer needed weekly sessions. You've built tools, she told me, and you found meaning. That's more than most adults ever manage. I cried when we said goodbye, not from sadness, but from gratitude. She had walked with me through the darkest corridors of my mind and helped me find light in the deepest corners of memory. I wasn't broken, I was rewired. Today I'm a teenager with a peculiar story, and a deeper appreciation for the fragile miracle of being alive. Caleb is still with me, not as a wound, but as a rhythm, a quiet pulse beneath my life's melody. And, as I move forward, building my future one memory at a time, I carry one truth with me always. Sometimes the past doesn't haunt us to hurt us. It calls us back so we can finally heal. When I first began remembering my earliest days, I thought I was cursed, trapped in a loop of pain and confusion. But what I came to understand is that memory, even the most fragile and buried kind, has a purpose. It can point us toward healing. It can reconnect us to what was lost. And in rare cases, like mine, it can open doors to truths that even science struggles to explain. I don't have all the answers. I'm still growing, still discovering how my mind works, still learning to be gentle with myself. But I know this. The brain is not just an organ, it's a story keeper. And sometimes that story stretches further back than we ever thought possible. I was never meant to carry my memories alone. I was meant to share them. And in doing so, maybe help others understand that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering differently. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you see memory in a new light, please consider staying with us. Subscribe for more incredible cases, hit that like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. And above all, take care of your mind. It may remember more than you know. We'll see you in the next case.